Welcome back to the National Building Museum. My name is Chase Rend, and I am fortunate enough to be the Executive Director here at the National Building Museum. And it's my pleasure to welcome all of you here for this evening's lecture by Laurie Olin and David Rubin, who are principals of the Philadelphia-based landscape architecture firm Olin. Landscape architecture is a very important part of the museum's mission. We feature leading landscape architects in our lectures and our panel discussions, and we often present exhibitions that either focus exclusively on landscape architecture or incorporate this significant design profession in broader contexts. Tonight's program is part of the museum's Spotlight on Design lecture series, and for a number of years now, this series has been generously sponsored by Lafarge, the leading building materials company in the United States. Additional support is also provided by the American Institute of Architects. The museum is most appreciative of the support from both Lafarge and the AIA. To say a few words, please first welcome Harry Lubitz, Director of Marketing for Lafarge North America Gypsum, and he will be followed by Marvin Malika, the 2009 AIA President. Harry?
Well, thank you, Chase. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and it's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of Lafarge North America. Since 2001, Lafarge has worked with the National Building Museum as, excuse me? Oh, it's okay. I got too far in the presentation. Look at that. Well, again, since 2001, Lafarge has worked with the National Building Museum as a corporate sponsor for Spotlight on Design. And we've welcomed more than 30,000 guests and featured many acclaimed architects and designers from around the world. Lafarge's partnership with the National Building Museum is one step in our ongoing commitment to work with and learn from architects in our community. We hope that together we can find innovative and sustainable solutions for construction industry and the general public, while also providing architects with the products they need for ambitious projects. Lafarge is a world leader in building materials with top-ranking positions in all its businesses, which are cement, aggregates, concrete, and gypsum, which is near and dear to my heart. But beyond that, we are proud of the fact that we're the only company in the construction materials sector to be listed as in the 2008 100 global most sustainable corporations in the world. Present with you tonight are many employees of our gypsum division based here in Northern Virginia. Lafarge is the world's third largest gypsum board manufacturer with 82 production sites in 25 countries. We're also the largest producer of recycled gypsum board in North America and feature several innovative products like our unique Rapideco Level 5 gypsum board and our Mold Defense family of mold-resistant products. Feel free to ask any of our Lafarge employees present tonight for additional information on those items. This evening, Lafarge would like to welcome Laurie Olin and David Rubin to the National Building Museum. We would like to thank the National Building Museum for all their work in support of Spotlight on Design, and our thanks as well to everyone in the audience for attending tonight. Thank you very much.
Well, allow me to say also what a pleasure it is to be here representing the American Institute of Architects. Chase, thank you, and thank you to the National Building Museum. American Institute of Architects is really pleased to be a sponsor for the Spotlight Design Lecture Series. It's certainly part of the core things that we believe in when we talk about great design and great designers, and we're certainly here to talk about that tonight. AIA and the museum work together on a number of things, and I'm really pleased to tell you that we're working on some more things that I think will be very exciting off into the future, and we're looking forward to that. Laurie Olin is one of our nation's most distinguished landscape architects. He's been chair of the landscape architecture program at Harvard, one of my alma maters, so we share that. But also he's been a professor of landscape architecture at the University of Pennsylvania for 30 years, crossing this really wonderful ability to go between practice and the culture of practice and teaching, which is really wonderful. Mr. Rubin's degrees in fine arts and his strong interest in nature merged at Harvard University, where he, in 1990, received a master's degree in landscape architecture, and his background and skills reflect Olin's blending of art and science to transfer the social and environmental systems that are so precious to us. Since its beginning, the Olin Partnership, established by Laurie Olin In 1976, the firm has developed landscape and plans for everything from garden spaces to urban spaces, crossing all of the spectrum of our built environment. The strong belief that they demonstrate in collaboration with allied professionals in designing strong, lasting projects shows respect and responsibility that extends to communities, environments, from the single-family residence to the multifamily project to the urban environment. These values and practices align with the strategic initiatives of the American Institute of Architects, and it's a pleasure that they are our colleagues in working towards a better place for people to live and work. So it's a pleasure to welcome you tonight. Thank you.
Before we start with our speakers, though, I would like to introduce you to Nancy Somerville. Nancy is a longtime friend of the museum. She is a longtime advocate for the design professions. She is the, I have your title here, Vice President and CEO of the American Society of Landscape Architects. And in her position there, she has expanded the ASLA's public relations program. She's increased their presence on Capitol Hill and enabled the Society to become a very effective advocate on sustainability, community planning, transportation, and land use issues. Nancy directs the Society's ongoing green roof education and advocacy programs, which are terrific, as well as ASLA's participation as a founding partner in the Sustainable Sites Initiative. We here at the museum are really proud of our alliance with the ASLA. They have collaborated with us in many ways as a Corinthian member, as a sponsor and supporter of many of our exhibitions and our programs over the years. So Nancy, I just want to thank you and ASLA for your critical support over the years, and certainly we look forward to continuing our partnership with you. So please welcome Nancy for some remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Chase. We so appreciate our partnership, and thank you and the museum for all of the terrific work that you do. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. Marvin told you a little bit about the Olin Partnership, but I am such a huge fan of Laurie and David that you will pardon me if I have to tell you a little more background that they might be too modest to completely share themselves. As with any truly brilliant design work, the projects of Olin speak for themselves. Bryant Park and Columbus Circle in New York City, the Pennsylvania Academy of Arts Plaza and Streetscapes, the Washington Monument Grounds and Portal here in DC, which you all know and love very well. I certainly do. The Memorial to the Murdered Jews of Europe in Berlin, many, many others. In their elegance, emotional resonance, and utility, these Olin projects are truly among the jewels of landscape architecture in this country and around the world. They clearly, if quietly, give form to the profession's commitment to enhance people's lives, respect the environment, and adhere to the very highest aesthetic standards. Tonight, we're lucky to have two of the actual voices behind these projects speak about their work and their guiding philosophies. Laurie Olin, FASLA, is quite simply one of the true masters of the profession. He is an ASLA fellow. Hold on, there are a lot of fellows to come here. An honorary member of the AIA, a John Simon Guggenheim Fellow, an Academy of Rome Fellow, a Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and has been inducted in the American Academy of Arts and Letters. He has won scores of awards, including the Rome Prize in Landscape Architecture in 1972, the Award in Architecture from the American Academy in 1998, the Wick Strickland Award in 1999, and the ASLA Design Medal in 2005. The list goes on and on. But he is also a remarkable person. As is evidenced by his presence here tonight, Laurie shares his passion and his intellect freely, whether in his numerous writings, his public lectures like this, or at the University of Pennsylvania, where he is currently practice professor. It is no wonder that some of the most gifted practitioners in the U.S. partner with him. Joining Laurie this evening is Olin partner David Rubin, ASLA. David received a BA in Fine Arts and the History of Art from Connecticut College in '85, then went on to earn his Master's of Landscape Architecture from Harvard in 1990, the same year he joined what was then known as Hannah Olin. David's fascination, as his degrees might suggest, is the marriage of fine art and sciences in the cause of serving both the public and the natural world. This expresses itself in projects that have won numerous awards, including several from ASLA and AIA. Among his current projects are the New York University Strategic Planning Initiative and Plummer Park in Los Angeles. David, too, is extremely generous in sharing his thinking, whether in writing and images as a visiting critic at the University of Virginia's School of Landscape Architecture in 2006, during his years teaching at the University of Pennsylvania, or in public talks like this. Laurie and David personify the work of Olin, which has just changed its name from the Olin Partnership. The studio recently received the 2008 National Design Award for Landscape Design from the Smithsonian's Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum. The award recognizes Olin for creating timeless places that enhance life and promote social interaction among diverse communities, as well as for being an early proponent of sustainability and green design. Olin is also the 2006 recipient of ASLA's Landscape Architecture Firm Award. You're about to see why. It is my very great pleasure to introduce Laurie Olin and David Rubin.
Good evening, everybody. I want to just thank Paul and Brenna for making us feel so welcome here, along with the folks that introduced us. Laurie and I are extremely pleased to be in front of you, to be participating with the museum, and to be sharing with you our work. We were thinking about what would be nice for you all to hear and what would be nice for the two of us to talk about, and we realized that there are two projects that are immediately related to each other. Laurie will be sharing some information about the Washington Monument, and I will be talking with you about a project that's ongoing at the intersection of 17th and Constitution. It's called Potomac Park Levee, and it's the completion of a levee project that happened, that started many years ago. But first, I just wanted to talk with you about where we all started. Nancy gave a wonderful introduction to ourselves, but I should talk a little bit more about the firm, because Laurie and I are just part of a larger entity called Olin, and it's comprised of many landscape architects. The firm started in 1976 with Laurie Olin and Bob Hanna. They were colleagues at the University of Pennsylvania and had met at the Academy in Rome. And this notion of being professors together and the collaboration that they espoused and offered was very important to the genesis of the firm itself. They were working alongside Ian McHarg at the time, and really understood the influences of an ecological system and how that could be married to design. The interesting thing was that Laurie in particular could understand that how to inform design in such a way that it would be socially purposeful and incorporate all these aspects that McHarg was espousing. The firm itself has it started, well, most recently 6 partners, now we have 10. But the folks that you see on screen, myself and Laurie, our colleagues Susan Weiler, Dennis McGlade, Bob Bedell, and our current CEO, Cindy Sanders, who is terribly gifted at leading our firm, and we're very excited about her participation with us. The studio itself has anywhere from 50 to 60 folks participating. Our one studio is in Philadelphia. We overlook Independence Hall, which is in the background of that photograph. We live in a former ballroom of the Public Ledger building in Philadelphia. You're all welcome to come up. It's quite an exceptional space with 24-foot ceilings, and we've inserted a mezzanine, and it's really the most pleasurable place to work. It will never be as clean as you see it in that photograph. I want to share that with you. I was sharing with Brenna earlier on that the thing that I like most about going to work is that it's a wonderful palimpsest. It's a mess. It's fantastic. I don't ever want to work in a clean studio. You can't think about design and not have a whole bunch of influences around you. And my desk, which is just out of the picture but is actually in the center of the studio, is clearly the messiest when you come to that studio. We are all teachers. That's the one thing that sort of binds us together. We have learned from Laurie and from Bob Hanna what it is like to teach, and really made that a purpose of the studio, not just us going out to universities and teaching, and Laurie teaching at Penn, Cindy teaching at Penn, but being visiting critics elsewhere, but also teaching internally. We actually have a professional development program, and we really do strive to elevate the character of landscape architects. We've had about 200 landscape architects pass through our firm, and it has been a tradition that in order to elevate yourself through the studio, you have to pass your exam. There are some firms, whether they're building architects or landscape architects, where you can practice and not actually be licensed. We don't think that that's the appropriate way to approach design. You actually should continue to learn through this process, and we give people the power to do that, and that's something that makes our firm unique, I think. We also draw. We love to draw. It's really part and parcel of our character in the studio. We're very well known for our renderings. The greatest challenge for us has been how to marry contemporary design, which is often demonstrated through machines, through computers, and still keep that hand-rendered quality. We think through our pencils. So we often have these very communal design renderings going on, and it's a way of not just communicating, attuning yourself to the design, because as Laurie says, if you can't draw it, you don't know how to build it. But it's also about sharing ideas with each other when you're there, whether it's the early morning or late in the evening or really early in the morning. When you're drawing together, you share ideas. And they may not be about the project, but they're about life. That's really important to us. And no one gets hired in our studio. I happen to be the partner who's involved with hiring. No one gets hired in our studio unless they have some other interest besides what they're doing. Because at 2 o'clock in the morning, you don't want to be talking about the design that you're doing. You want to be talking about something completely different. And if it's not interesting, you shouldn't be there. But drawing is really the heart of our firm and our practice. And from Laurie's doodles in his sketchbook to renderings where we try to really describe what it's like to be there, it's very important to us. Hand rendering, such as the paving patterns at Gateway in Los Angeles, all the way down to the Brooklyn Atlantic Yards, trying to, once again, in both cases, trying to figure out how the paving pattern informs the public realm. Here, a large drawing of our participation at Yale University. This is actually an amalgam of several different drawings, and that's the wonders of Photoshop. You can actually patch things together. But to work on whole districts and be able to describe what life might be like in an institution like Yale. To competition renderings, where you're really working with a computer to help define a space, to give people a general sense of character of the space. This is, in many respects, responding to I don't dare say a fad, but a trend that's happening in the way that we render our world. But the challenge for us is to try to get people to stop looking myopically at their computers and to look broadly, and to figure out how to get this type of drawing out on a table and get people to express themselves between each other. That's the challenge of Olin in the 21st century, trying to deal with those drawings. As I think Nancy mentioned, we've been dealing with sustainable issues for a long time. Actually, Laurie and I both joke with each other that we're tired of hearing the word sustainable because we've been doing it since we started this firm many years ago. It is inherently a part of what we do, and that's inherently a part of what landscape architects do. They bring together systems, living systems and static systems, and try to create spaces. The difference, I think, for us is that we've always looked to socially purposeful design, whether it's here at Bryant Park, or making spaces that were not there previously, as at Columbus Circle. And then dealing with those ecological systems holistically, truly holistically, such as the Church of Latter-day Saints in Utah. This is one of the nation's largest green roofs. That this building can hold a 747, and the meadows and the gardens that are on top of this building are incredibly expansive. They are habitat, they are sound buffering, they are conditioning for the interior and the exterior, but they are inherently a part of Salt Lake City. I think first and foremost, you have to understand that to understand our process, you have to know that we design places for people. For us, a successful space is one that's well attended. So if when we've completed a project and it looks great, but no one is in that space, it's considered a failure. Every project goes through a social sieve in our studio. That is the first level of sustainability for us. We consider how an individual and a group of people feel within the space we're designing. Our work is not about applying a graphic to the site. It's not about laying a graphic on a piece of land. It's really trying to figure out what it's like for people to interact in that space. So it's the consideration for positive social interaction, and you build good, timeless design around that principle. If there are two very different people adjacent or sitting in one of our spaces and they feel comfortable enough to sit next to each other, and that adjacency sparks a conversation, and as a result, that dialogue forms a new idea that 10 years down the road saves the world, then we will have been successful. That's our big, hairy, audacious goal, to allow people to come together in a space that we've designed and someday they'll save the world. With that, I just wanted to introduce our work in Washington. We've had the opportunity to design the U.S. Air Force Memorial just outside of D.C. near the Pentagon, and also the National Gallery of Art Sculpture Garden here in D.C. That really works 365 days a year to bring people together. And before I allow Laurie to talk about his efforts at the Washington Monument, I just wanted to share with you this one image on the right side. This is my favorite image in our collection at Olin, and this really summarizes how I feel about landscape architecture. This is a group of people, maybe they know each other, maybe they don't, they've come together for an event. The space that we've created is comfortable enough for them to sit in many different ways, whether it's with their feet in the fountain or turned around looking outward, or sitting in one of the benches that's in that site, or on the lawn amongst the sculpture, but they're there and they're communicating with each other. That's what landscape architecture is about. It's about that connective element, that design of space that allows people to communicate. That's what makes us, I think, unique and drives us when we work within the studio. So with that, I will turn it over to Laurie. He'll talk with you about the Washington Monument, and then I'll come back and talk about another project.
Thanks, David. Hi, it's really nice to be here. Some of you, I fear, may have heard some of these remarks before, but it's fun to kind of look back from time to time and see what it was you thought you were doing. In this case, oddly enough, President Eisenhower once made a remark. He said, "Things are more the way they used to be than they have ever been before," which is a typical one of those that philosophers would trip over that for many weeks trying to untangle that simple sentence. But, a lot of people, including myself, had an idea about Washington and the Mall, that it was this beautiful, wonderful place that was all sort of green and gorgeous and pulled together. And yet, when I look at slides of the place and what it really is and what it was when we began, actually it was a bit of a shambles. The National Park Service is probably one of the more abused agencies in our nation in terms of being at the bottom of a pecking order in an agency Congress loves to hate, the Interior Department, has struggled mightily to handle the huge crowds that come to it. And one of the things is that, oops, wrong button, okay, I'll use that one. One of the things that I will say is that I had thought that the Washington Monument grounds were more wonderful than they were when I finally became engaged. As you know, the world has changed considerably in many ways that we don't necessarily like since this terrible event of 9/11. And I had the great misfortune to be on a train going to a meeting in New York with Frank Gehry for a project that died that day, needless to say. And he and I were going, he had come from California, and I was coming from Philadelphia, and I was stuck on a train as this was unfolding. And being the sort of person I am, I didn't know what to do, so I drew it, which is really a strange reaction. But the last drawing on the far right I did just before we went into the tunnel at Newark. And of course, when I got out at Penn Station, one of the towers was coming down, and you know the story. Well, it had a terrible effect on our nation, and we're still suffering from some of it psychologically, but also physically. And one of the first things that happened was the public realm in Washington really went to pot. Your critic for the Washington Post at that moment was pretty upset, along with many other people. But one of the things is that in some of the chatter that our security agencies picked up after this event and during the event, the Washington Monument was named as another potential object of aggression or terror. And so there was this, as you know, Washington, having the Pentagon crashed into and everything, was not paranoid. If you think somebody's trying to kill you and they are, that's not paranoia, that's good judgment. And so one of the problems was what to do. And of course, you can't do much about airplanes with the Washington Monument, but you can do something about trucks and truck bombs, which of course we lost a federal building in Oklahoma and some embassies abroad to truck bombs. And so people thought there are other possible things that we should take precautions. And so, as you know, these Jersey barriers sprouted up all over Washington, D.C., and chain link fences and planters and God knows what all. And it was really horrible. And It looked like hell. The public realm was no longer very public, and it was all kind of a little bit haphazard. And as a matter of fact, by, I guess it was November, I got a phone call asking would I be willing to participate in a limited competition, invited competition of some leading landscape firms to try and design security facilities for the Washington Monument. And I immediately said yes, of course. So there went Thanksgiving and, and a few things. But I came down and I walked around. It was a nice cold day, and you can see, and I sort of thought I knew them all. But when I looked at it, and of course, one of the things to say to you, which most people don't understand, is the Washington Monument is its own grounds. It's not a part of the mall. Actually stops at the transverse, and then there's the Washington Monument, and then there is another thing called the Lincoln Memorial. And these are separate things that happen to be strung together, and it's a thing that some agencies here know about and pay attention to and worry about, but it should all hold together. But when I went and stood and looked around, I thought, oh my gosh, what a mess. There's this parking lot here, and the grass is terrible, and trees have been dying ever since Dan Kiley planted some of them for Lady Bird Johnson, and the thing was actually kind of in bad shape. And in fact, the topography was a mess, but then there were these Jersey barriers, and there were these cracked concrete sidewalks that ran straight up toward the mall, toward the monument, and which, of course, didn't meet any current standards of accessibility. So it was very clear that things had to change, and the question was how would they change, and what should you do, and what should the grounds really be like? And so, as usually happens with people like David and I and our partners, we started thinking, how did it get to be the way it is? What is the nature of this place? And so I went back and started looking, as far back as things like the Ellicott plan here of the L'Enfant layout of the city, which you'll hear a little bit more from David in a few minutes, and looked at the history of the mall, which I thought I knew a fair amount about, having worked on the sculpture garden for the National Gallery, and just having come and gone for many years here. Worked on a wonderful civic design and transportation study with Joseph Passano for a couple of years that got me to know and love the city. And so one of the things that I realized was that the monument grounds had been a graveyard of plans. This place has seen a lot of plans come and go. Even Robert Mills didn't get his whole scheme. You can see on the right the original plan. Architects and designers always try to get a little bit more done than the client quite often will deliver or can pay for, or something happens, the administration changes, or someone thinks that actually the obelisk is enough. We don't need the stylobate with the columns and all the extra busts and the other things that were going to be there. And Mills and some of his contemporaries actually had it in mind that there should also be some great gardens in this space that was a kind of void between the Capitol and the monument where the monument had got built. Here's the monument right here. And you'll hear about this canal in a little bit, but the monument was originally built right on the banks, on the shores of the Potomac River there, because this is a great estuary, as you know. And one of the things was, so a lot of this didn't happen, and then this, of course, thank goodness, a lot of it didn't quite happen. But, designers have great ideas. And so one of the things is that eventually pieces of stuff, sort of like what you just saw, some of it did get done, and there are these relic ponds, and there's a canal and a few other things. And they've filled out a little bit more of the shore here, and there's some design going on around what we call the Oval by the White House. And then we skip fast forward, and we come to Andrew Jackson Downing with Calvert Vaux. This is clearly a drawing, probably in Vaux's hand, a precursor for Central Park. It even has transverses with bridges over that you see later in the Greensward plan. So what we've got here is a kind of early trial balloon for Central Park on the mall by Downing. But it's also an arboretum, and there's a lot of other stuff. Here's the Smithsonian building. And you can see Downing thinking of how to deal with the Oval by the White House. And there's the canal still there. And the monument sits out here in this sort of English, Anglo park of sorts, which was the idea. Well, that didn't quite get built, but some of it did sort of happen. And so here you see these sort of groves of trees, and here's the Smithsonian, the Capitol, of course. Trains were still going back and forth. This is taken from the monument, obviously, so we can't see the immediate grounds, but you get the drift of what's around here. And so that sort of odd forest park arboretum-like quality that was what was developed by, shall we say, the end of the Civil War and after. Well, as you know, everybody in the room probably is familiar with the Macmillan Plan, the great kite plan here. And the notion of trying to clear up the mess and make it seem more grand and more, and we would think almost imperial, but the notion of a great shaft of space similar to the one in Nancy or some French Baroque effort, which really is in the spirit of the plan itself, the original L'Enfant plan, and of the sketch that Jefferson sent to L'Enfant, the notion of a big central space with significant public buildings beside it. So one of the things that comes out of this plan that, Burnham and a series of other wonderful designers produced, Frederick Olmsted Jr. and others, was this quite simply strong axial thing with a monument at the end, which later became the Lincoln Memorial, of course the Jefferson Memorial, the beginnings of what we call the tidal basin, all this big landfill in the Potomac here. But one of the things for you to notice is that it falls downhill, as you know, from this hill toward what was the swamp or the marsh down here. And this is her bottomland, which is why the canal was partly there originally. And one of the things is that, so they kept this flat, and they showed this transverse going straight under, and they pulled this straight over, and so the road actually goes under. And then they had this great idea of building this huge terrace with all these fountains and stuff around the monument. Well, of course, the Corps of Engineers told them it would sink out of sight, and then it wouldn't work, and so that didn't happen, like a lot of the other plans didn't happen. And so as we move through the 20s and into the 30s with people like Hubbard and Albert Peets and other people trying to figure out what to do and doing drawings, we find first a version that still hangs on to that, the one transverse just going right under, see it there? And this being pulled out with a great terrace to overlook the hill with the monument. And then here's Rainbow Pool and all that stuff, the tidal basin getting its bridge. But groves of trees with these kind of little clearings, and then that didn't quite happen, but interestingly enough, the next plan is simpler, dumber, got less budget, still holding on to the terrace, still doing this kind of oval drive. Now we've got parking lots. Here's where the parking lot came from. So we get parking lots, and you can drive up to the monument on these little carriage drives and all. And this great lawn with these groves of trees. And I was fascinated by all the different versions that had appeared. And then, of course, we come to Nat Owings and David Childs and Dan Kiley and Henry Arnold and all the folks who worked on this great plan in the 70s to kind of, again, clear up the mess and organize it. And you can see, and this is a plan that Carter Brown loved this plan and remembered it, and folks at the various agencies, NCPC and Fine Art Commission and others, really, they all endorsed this plan. It went with the Pennsylvania Avenue redevelopment plan, and it was to kind of produce a set of gardens which became more informal here where the old military buildings had been. And it really was to sort of say, this is the mall, it stops there, this is this beautiful clearing with groves of trees, we keep the access from the White House to the Jefferson. It was a very, I thought, okay, well that seems to be the last official plan, so I should start there. But then I was thinking, what on earth to do about the Jersey barriers? How am I going to stop a truck? Well, landscape architects have, interestingly enough, been dealing with barriers since the Roman times. In fact, the earliest treatises on De Agricultura by Varro and Cato and these people writing in Roman times, they talk about fences, hedges, ditches, dikes. They actually are giving you formulas for how to build this stuff. And we've been doing this for actually thousands of years. And so great, beautiful fences, beautiful things. And when I was back in the 70s in England on a fellowship that you heard about earlier, working on a study of the English landscape, this is a couple drawings I did at Busquet House down in the southwest of Britain, not too far from Oxford. And one of the things I was looking at was these cows, how they don't end up on the front lawn is because of this thing called a ha-ha, which is like a sunken moat in a wall. And I thought, well, there is a tradition for barriers in a landscape where they feel very comfortable. So there's that. And then I remembered the grounds of the Capitol. Now, one of the things about the Capitol, which grounds have been totally messed up as far as I'm concerned by the architect of the Capitol and various professionals. This is the Olmsted Vox plan. It was beautiful. I used to bring students here and show them and walk them around and look at the furnishings and start at the top and walk all the way down and look at all the lanterns and all the pavement and all the walls and all the railings and show them how you do an ensemble of pieces that have infinite variation but all kind of hold together with a few ideas. It's beautifully done. There used to be these fabulous fountains up here that became planters with these wonderful lights and stuff. It's all gone for this bunker that's up there now, which is probably quite wonderful. I haven't been in it yet. But it has received mixed reviews, and someone in the room may have done it, so I should stop on that. But one of the things is that however you feel about that, the grounds up there, I remembered taking students and showing them these walls, the way they handled the grading, the way they controlled crowds, that they would lead you in but keep you from cutting across the lawn. And then there was a place you could lean against, and whole groups of people would be sitting sort of not on them but against them and everything. And there's these wonderful granite steps, and the whole thing. I just thought, there is already a vocabulary at the other end of the mall with all the pieces I need to work with, and there's some traditions. So let's get going. So I went back to my office and sat with a young person there, and I said, how high is a Jersey barrier? How high does the wall have to be? What would it be? It's too high to sit on. Maybe it needs a footrest or something. The truck couldn't get through that, and you could grade behind it, and then, how do we keep people from falling off? Well, we'll think about that. And then sometimes you might not want to, maybe if you extend this out over a longer distance, you could actually grade up and then grade back out. And so if you go down to, say, the World War II Memorial and walk up, you actually can't see the wall because it does disappear this way. I couldn't pull that off everywhere because I wanted to keep the ball fields. I felt strongly about that, and I couldn't do this where some of the ball fields were. I felt it was very democratic. So I figured out how to keep the trucks from going up there. And by the way, if you think, well, who would do that? We don't need foreign terrorists. An American had already driven a truck up there and crashed into the monument a few years back anyway. He didn't have a bomb. He just was angry and drove into it. It's sort of like the farmer who drove his tractor into the pond in Constitution Gardens. So I could keep the trucks out. So now how do I get people there? Because now I've built a barrier in the way of people and the handicap and all that. And so it dawned on me that if you just take the wall and pull it apart, you could slide up between the wall. And then I thought, well, but then the cars can drive up. So then you put a bollard in the middle, and people can go, but trucks can't. And it's really simple. You just put these few things, and you play with them ever so slightly. And then there was a question of how to do the paths. The paths at that point came straight up from funny angles and went bang up into it. And they didn't meet ADA. So when I realized the height difference between down here by this little old monument lodge on the transverse and the top of the hill, which was about 17 feet, I thought 17 times 20, you get to 240 or something. Oh, how long is that? So I asked this young person in my office to give me a piece of string, and we cut it out the right length. And I put one end here, and then I just kind of looped it to see how long it would go and how it would get up there. And I thought, that's how it should go. So then I thought, well, we'll just do a few more of those, And so they'll be the right length. And that's, by the way, going to be a kind of cool way to go up the hill because it's gentle. And as you go, or as you come down, you kind of be spinning around and you'll be getting this view of the different monuments. So you'll be, if you come down, you'll look at the White House and you'll look at the Federal Triangle and then you'll look at the Capitol or something. So the notion of the path helping show you the city while you get up there nicely, comfortably. And then when you get there, there's this nice paved place that isn't all the cracked asphalt and concrete that used to be there. And then I decided to take out the parking lot and help Ohm van Sweden, who are old friends and very wonderful landscape architects here. If Ohm van Sweden, they had done a German memorial garden here opposite the Oval, and one piece was built and another piece was mostly built, but they didn't get the centerpiece because the parking lot was in the way. So I put the rest of their project back in so that someday they might get their whole project. It's not there yet, but history's not finished either. So one of the things then was to figure out the hill and start pulling groves of trees, and it's still a little moth-eaten here, but I was trying to keep all the ball fields because I like the idea of citizens out there sort of at the center of the most powerful, dangerous country in the world, and they're in their shirt sleeves, shouting at each other and running around the bases. I like that. So we, did the presentation. I stayed up all night doing this watercolor. It was a nightmare. I thought I was going to ruin it at any point. We made the presentation. We won the competition. And then, of course, some of the serious issues that I haven't talked about came up. One of which was, I'll back up very briefly. The question is, how do you screen people? Because, trucks are fine, but there was a big controversy. I'm not going to dwell on it at great length. But there was a problem of where do you have the magnetometer and people look in your bag and they make sure you're not carrying a bomb. Because if you can keep trucks from getting up there, how about a person? They weren't worried about somebody with a backpack full of 90 pounds of explosive walking up like they do in the markets in Baghdad and standing next to the bottom and blowing himself up because they would just chip a bunch of stones. They were worried about somebody going up in the elevator and turning it off here and blowing the whole thing out. So they realized that the real issue was an explosive inside. So the question was how to screen them. And I looked at this monument lodge, and I called Warren Cox, an old friend here who we'd worked with before, a wonderful architect, and said, Warren, I've got this idea in this competition. Can you help me? Would you like to participate? And he said, yes. And I said, why don't we use this as a way to screen people? And he said, yeah, but you can't, screen them in there and then they go back outside. And I said, no, we won't. What we'll do is we will go in a tunnel from there to the monument, because one of the things I learned was the monument does not sit on a hill. It sits on the mud bank, actually, of the Potomac River, and they built this huge foundation on spread footings and then piled dirt up around it to look like a hill. And that actually you could go right through that and go into it. So I had this simple-minded brainstorm, which people later thought was a terrible idea. But it was that you could come into the Monument Lodge, and rip the concrete hot dog stand off the back and restore it to what it had been. Come in and go down with the escalators or elevators and stairs or something, and then go into a center that would be the thing they needed, because there's no toilets, no place to get a drink of water, no place to buy a postcard, nothing to interpret the building, etc. No place for I almost called them forest rangers, the park rangers, etc. So the notion you could come in, there's toilets, there's a place for the rangers and security people, there's a little AV thing, and there's a place where you can get a screen, and then you go through a tunnel, basically, which could be automated or not, like in airports, and you come right through the basement, and you just take the elevator down one floor, because right now it stops here, it's the elevator, and once you're in the elevator, you can't see a darn thing till you're at the top anyway, so this is just start a flow lower, go up, and then you're up there. When you come down, let them out here and let them walk out onto the terrace. Simple idea. And then people hate to be underground, and they're trapped, and they're frightened, so I thought, we'll put a skylight on the lawn, so when you're there, you look up and see the monument, and then you could interpret it. It seemed such a simple idea. It became so controversial. Everybody hated it. They thought I was stupid. There was a woman here who comes to some of these events, may even be in the room, who was convinced that it was going to ruin the place. And the press loves people like that, because they make good press. And people like that are always attacking designers. And so she actually claimed, and the Washington Post, believe it or not, irresponsibly said that it might affect the foundation and this might fall over. I can't believe they even printed it or gave her the time of day. But anyway, they did. So people thought that would happen, and of course all the engineers said that's foolishness, but it went away. So then there was lots of fuss about that. So we're not going to talk about that. So there still is the funny little bump on the bottom, and maybe when we decide we don't really need to do that anymore, we'll just take the bump away, and then we didn't have to build the tunnel. So it's probably, sometimes the process makes you better, But I thought Truth in Advertising, you should know about that event if you weren't around for it. Then the next thing was to regrade the hill, lay out the walls, figure out how to make this the beautiful hill it should be, and then I began trying to figure out how to do the planting. So the grading, we're very proud of our grading. We love the earth. And then there was the wall, and how to design the wall so that people would get a warning and not fall off, and then people could sit on it. And then there was the whole business about drainage down the hill so it didn't come through the wall, and how to make the path and all that. But then I decided I wanted to put this footrest on parts of it where you might be watching a game. And I thought, how am I going to get that past blue pencil guys who are always doing value engineering? They'll say, what do you need a footrest on a terror barrier? So I called it a curb, and I said it was to keep the snowplows from hitting the wall. Now, it doesn't snow very much here in Washington, but it does once in a while, and vehicles could hit the wall, right? So we called it that, and everybody was happy, and we got it. And then the question was lights, and I had come to the conclusion the only vertical thing out there should be the monument and the flagpoles, and there shouldn't be any lamp poles. My God, the lamp poles would wreck the place. So we put the lights in the wall, and that was very simple. So it was a process of how to do very little very nicely, and then how to do pavement that was very clean and simple, how to do the flagpoles, and then how to do someplace to sit, because the time most people get there, they're pretty tired. We came up with a palette that, we went and we presented and worked out with the Park Service and with the Fine Art Commission. Everybody signed off on that. We came up with a palette of plants that, for the new planting that we wanted to do there, and that sort of thing, mostly drawn from the traditions. And then there was the business of trees we were either dead or dying, or that we needed to cut down for the grading, and then all the new trees, everything that's in a color here, was new planting we proposed. Now, needless to say, they're not all there yet, because as every project happens, at some point, people run out of money, it's taking too long, and things that could be done later, people put off. So there's still some work to be, it's an unfinished project, like almost every project that I know. So we got it built, we ripped it up, and we regraded the entire hill, and then built this lovely wall, and then came the business of seats. There are some really weird and wonderful anomalies. There's this Jefferson Memorial, which is where everything is measured from all the surveys in the U.S. that we had to keep, and so we couldn't change it. So it's one wrinkle, and then there's a few other things. But as you know, it got done, and it looks like the drawings. It's very simple. It's very clean. We're very proud of it. If I could do anything different, I would have done those as darker than the finish that I ended up with on. They're great at night. They're just a little bright in the daytime for me. Everybody makes a mistake. Anyway, here you see the grading. Here you see, it took 2 bollards, not 1, because of the dimensions we ended up with. And then there was this business of trying to come up with seats that were durable and were omnidirectional and that had some grace and had an elegant material that sort of went with the federal district that they're in, this monumental core. This is a version, actually, of another thing we've done, and we keep learning from ourselves and developing things. We started with a wooden bench at Battery Park City you saw a few minutes ago, and David's talk that this is a next step from which we have done a next step back from this again at Columbus Circle. And people tell you can't do a bench without a back because it's uncivilized and unsocial and it's not very nice and everything. But in this case, backs would have been a problem. They would have actually been too high, I think, on the hill. They would have looked like the Jersey barriers from a distance. So we had to purge the backs and then make them so darn comfortable that people didn't miss them. Plus, how long are they going to be there? But the other nice thing about not having a back is you can do that. And a lot of people, when they get out there, are really pretty tired. Or they want to look up at the monument. And they want to do that. And so the notion of trying to figure out where you are and what's different about this place from every other place you've ever been, and what's special to it and what is common is one of our themes. And so that's pretty much the story of how we got ourselves into that. And now David is going to, well, there's more. Just hang on. David is going to tell you about the next step of this, because something else then has come up that he has to deal with. Do you want this pointer or not? Okay.
Okay, so I'm never again going to follow Laurie Olin in a presentation because I can't storytell the way that he does, but indulge me, because I'm just going to go back one image if I can. The site that we're about to talk about, he works on this thing, that thing, I work on that thing right there. He's much more senior than I. When I get to be in his position, I'll be doing big things too. But I just wanted to take a moment because no project gets built by a single person. One of the things that I really love about the practice at Olin is that we have established for ourselves a very collegial environment, and we try to spread that in the process of design when we're working with various people. I would be remiss in recognizing the colleagues that I work with on this at Tetra Tech and at Lewis Berger. Lewis Berger has been both Tetra Tech and Lewis Berger are engineers, but Lewis Berger and the representatives like Jill Kavanaugh, who's in the room in the back, they've been exceptionally capable at helping to guide the process through this project that I'm about to share with you. And then also to recognize that this particular project involves so many different agencies, and it has been an incredibly intense, fast process to get something of necessity through. And it has involved the collaboration and cooperation of not just the National Park Service, whose land this project is, but the Army Corps of Engineers, who have to certify the levee I'm about to describe to you. And then the collaborative efforts and input of agencies like the Commission for Fine Arts and my colleague Tom Lubke, who's here, and David Maloney from SHPO and the City of Washington, D.C., and all of these other agencies that we have been working with diligently and trying to move forward in this. My story actually starts with 2 storms. The one you see on the screen, which is Katrina, and one that happened in Washington, D.C. in 1936, both of which had a significant impact on our national landscape, that is the mall, in the form of a levee. And the levee that was built, acknowledged by Congress, was built in 1938. It actually runs from the Lincoln Memorial to Constitution Gardens right here, and then the center line of it then rises up to the Washington Monument, and then the topography changes, so it's not as necessary. But there was a stopgap, and the stopgap was right here. It was never completed. And the challenge of Katrina was that FEMA redefined the 100-year floodplain. And the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers decertified that levee. So the entire levee is going to be at an inappropriate level. And certainly the intersection of 17th and Constitution didn't do anything at this point. What was in the plan was that you would take a bulldozer and dig away at the mound of earth that's here and pull it across the street along with Jersey barriers and sandbags, and that would be your stopgap. And the Corps said that's not good enough. And FEMA would then declare the Federal Triangle within the 100-year flood plan, and then the agencies and the homeowners would have to either redefine their building through an intervention, or they would have to start paying significant flood insurance. And so that was not an appropriate way to proceed. The levee that exists now runs along the north side of the Lincoln of the reflecting pool, and most people don't even realize it's there. You know, when you say to people that there's a levee on the mall, they're kind of shocked. But it's there, and that's it in this picture. It's recently been cleared of a significant number of its trees, and the Park Service has agreed to clear more as they die. They won't plant within a certain area, and I'll explain that to you in just a moment. But this is the new 100-year floodplain. And as you can see, it's very impactful and is potentially damaging to the economy of this city. And so there was an agreement between the city of Washington, D.C. and FEMA that if D.C. could put in place a stopgap by November of 2009, FEMA would hold off their declaration, and it would not impact the people that would be within that blue zone. And so that's what our goal is. Our goal is to create a levee across, a stopgap across 17th Street in advance of November of 2009, and this is that story. That's our site right there. The little yellow circle that just came on the screen, that's the area that we're talking about where this stopgap has to take place. It is right in the thick of things, and you can see the wonderful solution for Washington Monument there, all the adjacencies, including Constitution Gardens, what's called the Overlook Terrace, the World War II Memorial, and all the other proximate sites. And that's how the flood areas lay themselves across the site. So you can really see how within that yellow circle, that's a pretty significant zone. Aspects of the area, when I came down here to have our first team meeting, I have to say, like any designer who comes onto a project, I was a little bit intimidated. We were asked by the National Park Service to participate in this. They sort of told the Corps, you have to hire Olin. They'll help you resolve this. The Corps are there any folks from the Corps here, by the way? The Corps was like, what do we need to hire a landscape architect to do? It's a levee. We're going to put a levee in there. We'll be resolved. There's no reason to hire a landscape architect. And fortunately, the National Park Service seemed to say, you don't know Olin. And they didn't. And it took a little bit of time, but they kind of opened up to us and our participation. I made it a point when we were walking through the site, looking at all the different aspects of the site, to query everybody. I can remember talking to Tom and saying, what do you think about this? I remember talking to David Maloney. I remember just talking to folks on the Corps. I basically did an interview that sort of went the whole route of the site as we toured it, and we came upon this. That's the lockkeeper's house at the intersection of 17th and Constitution. And I will be the first to admit that I'm not the most historically savvy landscape architect out there. I know good design when I see it, and I'm proud of that fact, and I love to learn, and I love history, but I really didn't know the history of this portion of DC and why there would be a lockkeeper's house. And an epiphany happened for me. There's a correlation between the control of water through a canal because this is a lockkeeper's house, and the control of water through a levee. And I thought to myself, well, maybe there's some synergy here. Maybe there's some way that we can actually create a levee at this area and utilize the lockkeeper's house and give it a pedagogic objective. Figure out how to, it's overgrown. It's got boards up on the windows. Nobody knows it's there. It's really something you walk by, but it's important. It wasn't originally in this site, but it was near this site, and it had to do with the canal system, the Washington City Canal. And so, as we've described, Laurie and I, our work is very socially purposeful. We're always trying to figure out some reason why things should be that involve human beings. And teaching the national landscape, teaching about our history is what the mall is all about. And so why not try to figure out how to incorporate that? So somewhere in the back of my mind, I probably, those who have collaborated on this probably have gotten tired of the arguments that I've tried to push towards whatever we do, we have to remember that we're working towards a 100-year event, so the rest of the time it has to do something else, and why shouldn't it serve a greater purpose? Why shouldn't it serve the purpose of teaching? And that's where, kind of Olin's bent is on dealing with landscape architecture. So this is a view of the Washington Canal in 1856. You can see, you saw it in some of the drawings that Laurie presented earlier, going all the way from the Washington Monument in front of the Capitol and then down towards the Navy Yards that used to exist on the Potomac tributary. And this used to be an estuary, Tiber Creek, and though, about 1860, the silting that was happening made the canals unusable. It was really something that they ended up filling in. And on the right, you can see what the fill-in became. The fill-in became Constitution. That's where the canal used to run. That's the Washington Monument there. You can just make it out very faintly. So there was reason why all of this took place. And then I wanted to throw this drawing in because this is actually in the 1930s, 1937, the year after the significant flood that caused the levee to be built in the first place. And you can see on the right side this grading plan. Let's see what happens. Yeah, okay. So this plan right here is of this area right here. These tennis courts are those tennis courts. And you can see these Navy buildings, I think they were Navy buildings, here and here. You can see the Corps trying to slip in that wedge of land here and push this wedge of land out here to avoid the tennis courts. But you can get some sense of where they were trying to figure out where this stopgap would be. And it makes sense that this is the lowest portion of land. This is actually an overlay that I did. This is my favorite plan of DC. It's the King Plan from 1818. Not just because it's the most articulated plan and most accurate plan of its time. It's when they really did a significant effort in surveying the site and making sure that everything was there. But it also shows at both, at the same time, it shows the estuary that was the Tiber, and it shows the street plan that would become at the same time. And then I laid over top of it the 100-year floodplain, and of course it's kind of like, it makes sense. That's where the floodplain is going to be. It's why they built the canal there. It was the lowest portion of land going through DC. It takes drawings like this to spark my brain sometimes. But it all makes sense in terms of what was there and what we were trying to do. So this is what we had to put in place. This is the goal. The goal is to put in a post and panel system that would cut across 17th Street and stop that 100-year flood event. And in fact, what Congress has asked for is to stop the 185-year flood event, which happens to be at an elevation of 18.7. So there was consensus that instead of designing this thing twice, we would design the stopgap to be 18.7. That's key for you to remember in your heads as we go through this. The rest of the site is not at 18.7, so eventually they will have to go back to the areas around that and build those up a little bit, but the stopgap is designed at 18.7. So these post and panels take a lot of space as well, and the goal, one of the goals for this project is to put the posts and panels in a place where they are accessible to the National Park Service, because they have to get them to the space very easily under constrained circumstances. I mean, if a flood is coming, they have 24 hours to put this thing up. And so part of the issue was to put something proximate, because the closest yard actually for the NPS would actually be underwater in an event, so you can't put them there because they wouldn't be able to get to them. Part of our inspiration was going to look at what the C&O Canal was like. The Washington City Canal was part of the C&O trail of canals that went up through, and this is actually in Georgetown. And I was very much informed by the character and quality of the walls, and began to doodle in my sketchbook, what happens when you pull walls out of the landscape like that and try to put them in relation to the lockkeeper's house possibly, but begin this dialogue about the control of water on the mall. And so these were our issues and concerns, and I apologize for reading this, but it's easier for you to get this information in place first. To create a levee closure that's at 18.7, to create a barrier that can be erected with limited warning time, establish a location proximate to the site where the post and panel pieces can be stored, design a system that can establish a stopgap within the timetable agreed to by FEMA and the District of Columbia, design within the budget allotted by Congress, and, oh, by the way, create a levee that fits within the national landscape of the mall. That's not too little to do. So we're beginning to look at what the aspects of this design, what's informing this design. This is just a drawing that talks about sight lines that are important. Most notably, I think, on this drawing is the Virginia Avenue view corridor that ends up at the Washington Monument, an issue that would play itself out long-term on the evolution of this project. This drawing represents the ridge lines that are happening through the site, because obviously you want to work with the highest ground possible when you're dealing with an elevation issue. You should know that 17th Street runs uphill. So the lowest point is here, and it runs uphill. So it's going from a roughly 8 to roughly 13 here. And the goal, if you remember, is 18.7, the magic number. Some of the things that we had to deal with are the significant trees in the area, the elms, the black walnut, the sycamore. And you should also know that there are two types of levees that can be put in place. One is an earthen berm, which requires a no-plant zone that's a total of 92 feet. Or you can inform it by a flood wall, which would allow you to plant anywhere beyond 15 feet from the face of the wall. So you can imagine, depending upon what condition we're trying to work with, whether it's on the Constitution Garden side or the Washington Monument side, that one of these might play itself out better than the other. We went through every extreme, from trying to define a new type of Jersey barrier that would have a pedagogic objective. If it had to be out there and laid out there, this would be one of those solutions. I'm pleased to say this was completely rejected. To a more artistic interpretation of this, sort of the Richard Serra approach to creating a levee on the mall. We really wanted, in a 2-day workshop, we really wanted to show the participants, which included all of those agencies that I listed, and the engineers, every range of it. We settled upon two alternatives after a lot of dialogue. I'm really compressing this into its history, although we were working very fast. Alternative 4 and Alternative 5. You can actually imagine that there were many more alternatives than that. This was a key drawing. If 18.7 was the elevation that was the highest point, how do we use walls in the landscape that don't sort of make people feel small? People don't like walking by walls. They don't like walking along walls. How do you deal with the topographic change in such a way that you place a wall so that people actually feel good against it? These are the two alternatives that I'll first explain to you, and then I'll sort of whip through the current iteration of this, which is, I don't know what number we're up to, actually. But Alternative 4 was closer to the intersection of Constitution and 17th, and Alternative 5 was further south. Starting with Alternative 4, the one that's closer to the lockkeeper's house, you can see on the left side of the drawing the use of a levee wall, that's this line here, and the use of a levee wall on this side. Really what we were trying to do was figure out how we could inform the site in such a way that part of the space that is created is a plaza that might then eventually receive, when money was available, the movement of the lockkeeper's house onto the plaza, thereby removing it from the edge of Constitution and putting it in a place where people could appreciate it more. And also find a place to store below grade the post and panels. So that's what you're looking at in this drawing, the various elements. The way it defined itself, looking at the structural character of this, You can see how the wall system would be described on an everyday situation. We wouldn't take out every tree, I promise. And this would be what would happen when you would put the post and panel. It was a significant run when you consider that a post and panel system is $10,000 a linear foot. So it's not an inexpensive solution. But we were trying to find something, again, that could exist when it's not up for most of the time. So these are the two views looking north on 17th Street, above the existing conditions and below the proposed solution. From the Washington Monument grounds, looking towards the intersection, and existing conditions today. And because this was going to be built in two phases, what's the solution that will go in November of 2009, and what will be the eventual solution? The first solution would be to put in concrete walls that then would receive, in phase 2, stone cladding that would in some way be informed by the adjacent site qualities. That would be alternative 4. Alternative 5 was further to the south, closer to the World War II Memorial. It had walls that were coming out of Constitution Gardens, and was received by a low wall on the Washington Monument side, which then also received the post and panel. So a crane would simply go up to the area on the right side and lift out the post and panels, and they would be then erected across the site in the event of a flood. Just existing conditions at the top, and then proposed conditions at the bottom. And one of the benefits of this particular iteration was this notion that it might actually create view corridors that you would come upon towards the Washington Monument, as you see in the bottom image. Existing conditions today, the first phase solution, and the second phase solution. So where we are now with this project is this particular iteration. It's actually gotten a lot of consensus. There was some notion that it needed to be closer to Constitution, but would be slightly removed from that. You see the two walls that are coming away from Constitution Gardens and onto the Washington Monument side. And I want to, in particular, thank a gentleman who's in the audience, Tom Lubke, because when we were having one of our dialogues, one of our meetings, he said to me, David, why not think bigger, think broader, think more impactful, see if you can't use the site that's in a broader context to inform the solution to this project. And we were given the opportunity to change the character of Constitution Gardens, and that helped us a lot. This solution allowed us to have a view corridor from Virginia Avenue onto the monument grounds, and also back from that as well. And you can see how the Virginia Avenue corridor aligns with the Jefferson monument, the little red plus at the bottom of the screen. We took the existing path conditions, which are shown in red, and actually modified them slightly on the Constitution Garden side to try to better inform that site, actually allow it to potentially receive what was originally intended for it, which was a restaurant, and also incorporate all of the different monuments so that somebody could do a beautiful loop, and it was more in keeping with the character of the walking condition along the mall. This would be the ridge line that would go through the site. And then finally, the iteration as it would be seen with the restaurant in place, potentially, and what would become the Olin landscape plan for the Washington Monument would be finished off on the monument side, and some planting plan yet to be determined would be done on the Constitution Garden side, with the intent that when you're sitting up there in that cafe, you would have some view out of that grove of trees to the Washington Monument in the distance. So it's thinking about the solution holistically and more broadly. So that's the project as it exists to date. We're still going through our approval processes, but that's where we stand. I just wanted to leave you with a little bit of where we are as a firm. You may have noticed, if you know our firm from previous experiences, that we've changed our name. It's now Olin as opposed to Olin Partnership. We think that this is a wonderful way to sort of brand ourselves. Olin becomes something more about the quality of landscape design as opposed to an individual's name. And we're all very proud of that name change. We also have a new website, so if you go, received very positive reviews about that, and we're very excited about how well that's been received. It's fairly innovative. And then finally, I'm shamelessly plugging our monograph, which we just completed as well. It's our first monograph, the only monograph we have right now, and we're very proud of it, and it's available in the bookstore opposite. With that, I want to thank everyone for coming this evening. Laurie and I are very proud to have been able to share this work with you, and we appreciate your time. Thank you. Now the hot seat.
Wait. David, I want to say well done, because that was exactly 1 hour.
Well, good.
Yeah.
Timing is everything.
We have time for a few questions.
Timing is everything
so,
in design and art and love and everything else. Right? Go ahead,
So
Paul.
if you'll kindly raise your hands, I'll be happy to come around with the microphone. Don't be shy.
Yeah, don't be shy. Come on. Oh. Yes, hi, there's a question.
Did you ever consider any incorporation of the Burnham buildings, those two capital transplants that are across 17th Street on the...
Actually, we've had a lot of dialogue about that. That was actually part of this note. There's been a lot of dialogue about gateway and threshold,
Yeah.
and what it means to pass from Constitution into the mall. And it was one of the structures that we cited as being of a scale. And we
Right.
were actually using it in the comparison of alternate 4, which was the alternate that was closer to Constitution, where we had these low walls that we actually designed them to be the same footprint as the Burnham
It's not
structures.
Burnham, you mean
Or, sorry,
Latrobe.
Latrobe.
They're Latrobe, but one of the, if
Yeah.
you remember, those who've gone down and stared at them, they're sweet little things, but they also have flood levels marked on them. So if you go down, that'll tell you that this isn't a fantasy. And one of the problems that David and all of his colleagues have had on that particular project is that whatever, you get 3 things right and then one falls off the table. And it's a very complicated problem. But the reason people keep wanting to push it up toward Constitution Avenue is because you're going uphill and then the panels can be shorter. Then people say, oh, now it's in the way and it's too close. So then they want to push it downhill and then the panels all get taller. And so it's a kind of a wicked problem.
It has been a big challenge for
Yeah,
us.
yeah.
I do want to say, one of the things that is interesting about these two projects and presenting them in the same talk is that the two problems are actually what landscape architects are facing in the 21st century. Landscape architects are solving security issues in the land, and they're solving infrastructure.
Yeah. Infrastructure, the hydrologic cycle, social terrorism and security and safety. I mean, these are really things that we've been doing for centuries, but now they're back again in a whole new form, and with in larger cities with more people involved and higher stakes. It's very interesting.
The thing about problems like this is where do people come into the equation?
Yeah.
And it has been our modus operandi in our studio to always solve for the people, and trying to figure out where that portion of the equation lays itself out. And I think that's the, recognizing that there's infrastructure is not a bad thing. Yeah. It's how do you deal with it on a day-to-day basis, and can't you think of it creatively? It's not simply about an aesthetic prettying of it. It's
Right.
about the socialization of that infrastructure and trying to figure out how to incorporate it into your daily life.
Yeah, let me say another thing. One of the things that I've thought for many years, and I think we've tried to do in a lot of our work, my colleagues and I, is that usually if you've thought of a solution for something that only solves one problem, there probably is a better solution, because most of the really good designs do 2 or 3 things at once. It's not just a can opener that only opens cans this size. That usually a good design affords 2 or 3 things at once, and you want to try and make sure that it's doing more work for the effort. And so that's part of David's instinct on this project. And it's interesting how one project, when we're working on the one with the mall, with the monument after 9/11, we brought in a lot of stuff that they didn't ask us to do. They didn't ask us to redo the whole grounds, they asked us to do security. But we were really interested in the public realm and the civic quality of the city, and how to restore that, which led NCPC to ask us to join a series of my colleagues, some other landscape architects, to look at security for the whole monumental core and how to clean it up and turn it into a design positive thing instead of a negative thing. And that's pretty much what David's been trying to do with this project, which was, we hadn't even thought of that. That wasn't even a problem when we were working on that. And now, lo and behold, we weren't solving the whole thing as usual, you know. Next question. Let's change the topic. Hi.
Hi. I think you talked a little bit about Battery Park City and Bryant Park, and I think those projects are remarkably successful.
Thank you.
And in looking at them, it seemed to me that a lot of it had to do not only with the design of the space and allowing for people to interact, but also with some of the programming that
Right.
Bryant Park was putting on, and Battery Park had board games and things that they are doing. Can you talk a little bit about that aspect of projects here in DC,
Sure.
where the program is somewhat obvious, but also what else were you trying to do?
It's a really good point, and that is that you can only do so much with physical design. Both of those projects that you mentioned, Bryant Park and Battery Park City, there were a lot of bright people involved who weren't the designers, and we were given a lot of information. Of course, with Bryant Park, William H. White, Holly White, had done some early research and studies and had made some proposals of what the program should really be, and made some of the key suggestions about opening it up and everything, and about some of the circulation, about some of the uses and where they might be best located. So the notion of the social activity began to come toward the project even before we got into physical design, which, as every architect knows, you know, the person comes to you with a need and a whole series of things, and that's what you're supposed to be giving form and expression to in some ways. There were other things, however, that we said, well, yeah, that's all well and good, but, you know, how about loose chairs? That you know, because the park benches in a row, we decided was just not good enough, and we had seen precedents in Europe. So one of the things about Bryant Park, although some of us feel it's overmanaged to some degree today, or they put too many things in, or they stop fussing with it. Frankly, I think it's a little, you know, Dan and his guys are a little overdone right now. But Bryant Park Restoration Corporation, under Dan Biederman and all the people who have come and gone there, have done a brilliant job of managing the park and programming it, putting activities in it, seeing to it that it had enough going on that people would come and make it safe. Battery Park City, on the other hand, when we started, was just a big pile of sand, and they wanted to build some buildings. And so we had to kind of make it all up. And we started making it up, and then the people who came along, and as the agency grew, and as people came, and as they developed their own parks core, what happened was more people began inventing program and bringing things to it. And so it got richer and better. But after that, we've now realized when we work with clients that one of the first things we do is we try and figure out what are all the things you could do there, where would you put them, how would you arrange them, which ones cancel each other out, which ones need to be separated. And so we actually do like graphic visual mapping of social activity before it even happens in our parks to test it and see how it might be.
You have to realize that the work that we have a common mission statement in the studio. It's to create places that enhance life. So that we have, 6, now 10 partners who work with that goal in mind. That's what I described as the social sieve. The first sieve of effort is put through that, and we're always drawing with the notion of what is it like for people to be there? How can we facilitate communication between very different people? Open space is the fully democratic space in this country. Building architects design buildings. They're objects for specific types of people, more or less. Landscape architects design space for everyone. And so it's socially purposeful design. You're trying to get an incredibly intellectual individual and somebody who may be underemployed to exist in the same space. And that can be an incredibly challenging and daunting task. And it's through looking, our interests are not just about landscape architecture, about sociology, anthropology, the social sciences, and trying to figure out, how to mix those with all of the environmental sciences, all of the natural systems, because we are part of that natural system and we are part of that social system. So this is our playground. This is what we do. And whenever we approach a project, we're always trying to think of those issues.
There are a couple of dilemmas today in our society in the design of public space. And one is that the hardest thing to produce anymore is calm and quietude. And in the middle of busy, big cities, since part of our goal is to make cities habitable at higher densities, because that's the only way we're going to save the open countryside and the natural environment, is to make cities more rich and livable, and people want to raise kids in them and be in them. And so we have to figure out how to produce density with amenity, and that leads us to the problem of just having something that allows for a lot of active recreation. Then where is the quiet? And then if you produce something that produces the quiet, then there's the people who want to kind of let off steam. And so trying to figure out how to bring those together or keep them apart and make sure we get both is part of the dilemma, the individual versus the group, and to design spaces that give affordance for both being able to be gregarious and to be able to be withdrawn. And so in some of our work, we spend a lot of time, I actually have thought a lot about how people sit and how they sit down. And we have hundreds of slides of people sitting. And we've designed, I don't know how many different kinds of benches. I teased David because I want to do our book on people sitting in public. A little book, just a little book. But it'd be, but the notion of when you do a bench that's concave versus convex, and how one induces conversation and the other allows you to sit kind of with your back almost to somebody but cohabit the space but be alone. You know, the notion that you need both, and you know, how we do that and how we produce spaces that allow all that to happen in some coherent way that doesn't look like chaos is a really interesting design problem. You know? So yeah, we think about it all the time. It's not just fighting crime with quiche. There's more to it.
Let's take just one more question.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Here's a question over here. Yeah. Oh.
You've mentioned different parts of the mall, the National Sculpture Garden
Yes.
and the Washington Monument.
Yes.
You must have done some thinking about the mall itself, where we have the Book Festival and the Smithsonian
Well, we know
Folklore
a lot.
Festival. What do you have some thoughts you might share with us about the future of making the rest of the mall fit this high status and stature you've got for the other
Well,
areas?
the National Park Service has recently, with the ASLA, I believe, run a big, long, complex workshop trying to figure out what the issues are, what the program can and should be, and how to approach it. And we weren't involved in that, but we have feelings about it, but not about not being involved in it. I'm happy to let someone else worry about that. But on the other hand, a lot of people have puzzled about how to build something that is durable there, that is, I mean, it's like some child's teddy bear that's just rubbed to death. It's loved so much, it is just worn out. It is so compacted, it is so overused and so abused on the one hand, and yet it should, because people should all want to come together at the center of the nation. And so there are a series of issues that have to do with the social use and the physical facilities that are out there. Just keeping all those elms, you know, they're kind of junkies. They're all sort of on their little IVs and everything, keeping going. But the thing is that the National Park Service has an incredible problem on their hands, and they have been seriously underfunded. I mean, if you really want to help the mall, get the Park Service more money first. I mean, I would say I don't work, you know, they've been one of our most wonderful clients, but they have some serious dilemmas in terms of their resources and their ability to control what happens there, because an awful lot of other people do things to them there.
I think it's safe to say, though, that we would very much like
We'd like to be
part
involved.
of that solution.
Yeah.
And I have hope in the
Yeah.
near future that might be the case.
Well, David and Laurie have graciously, kindly agreed to sign copies of their monograph, which of course is available in the museum shop. So let's thank them both very much for being here tonight.
Thank you.